Hiccup and Toothless are the best duo we've ever seen, which is why we just can't get enough of them. With How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World well on its way, fans are starting to come out with crazy theories that make way too much sense. Watch until the end to find out what the people of Berk and dragons have in common.
Isn't it weird to think that your hand was inside a dragon? Like if your mind was still in control of it?
Two birds of a feather. Before Hiccup befriended dragons of all shapes and sizes, the Isle of Berk lived in fear of those fiery beasts. But before long, the Vikings opened their hearts to new possibilities, giving birth to a new way of life. Instead of hunting dragons, the Vikings learned how to live by their side, and today they ride them like they would a horse with wings. A popular fan theory that's been circulating around the internet is that bone nappers and armor wings are somehow related. The popular opinion is that these two dragons share a common ancestor, which could explain some of the similarities between them. We mean, just look at them. They're basically the same dragon hidden behind different armor, right? Before we dive into the similarities between these two breeds, let's find out what makes them individuals first. First on the list is the big and mighty bone napper, a dragon who is often looked down upon by its own kind. This probably has everything to do with the fact that bone nappers collect and wear the bones of deceased dragons, which isn't exactly an endearing characteristic. But if they fail to do this, they'll become nothing more than prehistoric chickens, and that's not a good look for anyone. Bone nappers spend all of their time looking for bones that are suitable for their shape and size. In fact, they'll risk their lives to find the perfect ones. Unlike normal dragons, bone nappers have soft and squishy scales, which makes them super vulnerable to attacks of any kind. Eret, son of Eret, is super fond of these magical beasts, which is why he chooses to ride one wherever he goes. Bone nappers tend to live in dragon graveyards, and for the longest time, they were thought to be extinct. So could the bone napper be the armor wing's long-lost relative? We think so, and here's why. Armor wings and bone nappers are both mystery-class dragons who prefer to live in solitude. They have soft scales that need protection, causing them to search for armor wherever they go. Whereas a bone napper goes for bones, an armor wing seeks out metal. They have similar horns and lethal tails, and they're both known for having pale green skin. However, some armor wings are orange, and funny enough, sightings of orange bone nappers have been documented. However, seeing one is super rare.
I can't believe it! A dragon eye lens on a dragon?
So do we have you convinced? If so, it looks like Eret and Snotlout's dragons might be distant cousins of some sort. The Game of Thrones theory. A year after the first How to Train Your Dragon movie came out, an HBO TV series called Game of Thrones took the world by storm. And while both these productions had many similarities, one stuck out above all: dragons. When we were first introduced to Hiccup, he's a timid and clumsy guy who wants nothing more than to make his father proud. But instead of slaying dragons and becoming the Viking everyone wants him to be, he befriends dragons and learns how to ride them. A popular fan theory is that Hiccup Horrendous is none other than Daenerys Targaryen's ancient relative. In fact, some might say that Hiccup is responsible for the entire Valyrian race.
We're Vikings. It's an occupational hazard.
How to Train Your Dragon takes place in a pre-medieval setting, which fits right into the Game of Thrones timeline. On top of that, Hiccup's a natural when it comes to handling dragons, which could be a gene that was passed down from generation to generation. More than that, Hiccup is bound to marry Astrid and have kids of his own one day. So perhaps Astrid's super fair hair was carried down in the gene pool, creating the classic Valyrian look we've all come to know. If you've got your Valyrian history down packed, then surely you remember how Valyria was placed in a desolate part of the world, far away from modern civilization. And you'd also know that Valyria was wiped off the face of the earth when the doom came for the small islands. So could it be that the Isle of Berk eventually became Valyria? And that Hiccup and Astrid's relatives escaped to Dragon's Edge for refuge? If so, this means that Dragon's Edge and Dragonstone are one and the same, but with slightly different names. If Hiccup's descendants are in fact the Targaryens, then it makes sense that they would have access to a land in Westeros. After all, Dragon's Edge is said to be a 34-hour trek from the Isle of Berk. Oh, and here's a coincidence we just can't ignore. Actor Kit Harington, who plays Jon Snow in Game of Thrones, also plays Eret in How to Train Your Dragon.
You won't be changing any minds around here.
So if this isn't enough to get you guys on board with this theory, we don't know what is. Malka, the Scythian warrior. At the beginning of the first How to Train Your Dragon movie, we learn that Hiccup's mother was killed by a dragon when he was just a baby. Okay, well, we learned that she was taken by a dragon. But by Viking law, being taken by a dragon and being killed by one basically meant the same thing. However, during How to Train Your Dragon 2, we find out that Malka is very much alive and thriving in a dragon utopia. Although Malka is allegedly a Viking, there are some fan theories surrounding her heritage, or rather, her fake heritage. A Reddit member that goes by the name of Observa wrote a theory that put Malka's background on the stand, and most of her evidence is too spot on to be wrong. According to Observa, Malka isn't a Viking, but rather a Scythian female warrior, and here's why. For starters, Viking women weren't allowed to be warriors. In fact, they hardly ever joined their husbands in battle at all. Instead, they stayed home to raise children and take care of trivial matters. But when it comes to Scythian warriors, women were known for their excellent fighting skills. And since Malka is often referred to as an amazing warrior, we're inclined to think that she's not a Viking at all. Scythian people lived during the same time as the Vikings did, and were known for being nomadic people who were fond of riding huge horses in battle. Vikings, on the other hand, had no love for horses and preferred to do their bidding on boats. So could it be that Stoick and Malka met and fell in love against all odds?
We have to save the dragons.
If so, it could explain why Malka felt like an outcast while living on the Isle of Berk. After all, why would she want to run away from her hometown, newborn son, and husband if she was born and raised a Viking? From where we're standing, it looks like she longed for her old life back, but was forbidden to continue being the fierce warrior she was raised to be. So when a dragon came to carry her off, she saw it as a way to start a new and better life. An alpha named Toothless. Although dogs and dragons are significantly different, they do have some things in common. Mainly, they both do whatever their alpha commands them to do. In How to Train Your Dragon 2, we found out the hard way that Toothless was no match for the Bewilderbeast's commands. And sadly, he blasted Stoick with his fiery powers, causing him to pass away. Shortly after, though, Toothless snapped out of his trance and challenged the alpha to save Hiccup from an untimely death. So how did a tiny dragon take on a big old Bewilderbeast? Well, a popular fan theory is that Toothless was an alpha in the making all along. He just didn't know it yet. Do you guys remember when Toothless took on the Red Death in the first How to Train Your Dragon movie? Well, if you do, then surely you recall how the Red Death was the alpha of her pack. And as the hierarchy goes, dragons who successfully beat alphas take their place at the top. Knowing this, it makes total sense that other dragons chose to coexist with the Vikings after the big battle. After all, why would any of them want to live with the Vikings after being hunted by them for generations?
No matter how this ends, it ends today.
The popular theory is that Toothless is the alpha dragon of Berk. However, whether or not he was aware of this is a question we don't have answers to. But once he made the choice to snap out of the Bewilderbeast trance, he began to glow a deep blue before challenging the alpha and eventually beating him. So the moral of the story is that Toothless has been an alpha since the first movie. But this assumption leaves room for suspicion, which leads us into our next theory. Toothless, the double agent. Here's a theory that you might not fall in love with, but hey, blame the internet, not us. A popular fan theory is that Toothless is a double agent of some sorts. In the first film, Hiccup uses his brilliant mind to fashion a dragon-killing device. However, after firing it, he realizes that killing dragons doesn't feel as good as he thought it would. With a guilty conscience, Hiccup locates Toothless and nurses him back to health.
Yes! I have brought down this mighty beast!
And to make up for his bad deed, he creates a device that allows Toothless to fly. But there's a catch. The harness is only effective if he controls it while he's on his back. Having little to no options, Toothless welcomes the friendship despite knowing that it's Hiccup who shot him down. So later on, when it comes time for Toothless to save Hiccup from the fiery pits, he purposely latches onto his leg, which results in him losing it. So despite saving Hiccup, he gets even with him. An eye for an eye, right? Well, not quite. because the score is not even yet, and here's how the alpha theory ties into the double agent one. Despite loving Hiccup, Toothless despised Stoick, and how could he not? After all, he did murder hundreds of dragons during his lifespan. However, killing Stoick out of the blue was too risky, so Toothless pretended to be under the bewilderbeast's mind control, knowing full well that Stoick would sacrifice himself for Hiccup. This way, he could get his revenge without being punished for it. Although we believe Toothless to be as harmless as a puppy, we can't deny that Stoick's death was a little suspicious. After all, Toothless came out of his trance for Hiccup a few scenes later, but would have obliterated him seconds before.
No! Get away from him!
The Isle of Fireproof Vikings. Believe it or not, but there are some fans who believe that Hiccup and his people are indeed fireproof, or fire-resistant at best. While it's true that hundreds of Vikings have been killed by dragons, there's hardly ever record of them being burnt to a crisp. Instead, people were eaten alive or carried away by them. On more than one account, we see Hiccup and his friends come inches away from huge flames without showing any signs of discomfort. If these Vikings could actually feel the burn, they'd be jumping off their dragons' backs as soon as a flame was thrown their way. To support that notion, let's think back to Stoick's death. Although Toothless's blast did result in him passing away, he wasn't fazed in the slightest, proving that his skin wasn't affected by the fire. However, Toothless's blue plasma blast was more than effective. On top of that, we all saw Hiccup fall into a field of fire, but this accident only resulted in the loss of his lower leg and nothing else. In fact, every single hair on his head was intact despite falling headfirst into the flames. This theory sheds even more light on the Targaryen theory at the beginning of this video, which toys with the notion that the Targaryens are descendants of the Haddocks. This makes complete sense considering that the Targaryens are immune to fire as well. So, there you have it, guys. The 6 craziest theories surrounding the How to Train Your Dragon franchise. Before you go, let us know which theories you agree with and which ones you think are hogwash. And that's a wrap. Make sure to subscribe to The Things to be first in line to watch our newest videos. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.